Okay, so today's video is going to be about 4.1, which is production. We need to look at 3 different types of production, and then we need to look at the impact of technology on those types of production. So the first one we need to look at is job production. This is basically where production happens job by job. Each individual product is produced individually. For example, making a piece of furniture to order, customising that piece of furniture for a person. So when you go into a shop, choosing a sofa, choosing the type of fabric you want, choosing the cushions you want on it, that sort of thing. Building a bridge. You can't just have a bridge factory that produces the same bridge over and over again. Bridges need to be made to fill the perfect gap. Creating a customised cake. When you put in an order with a home baker and they create you with a perfect wedding cake of your dreams. Or arts and crafts type things, if you order a particular painting or a photography shoot or something like that, they're all individual, they're not produced the same every single time. The advantages are it's high quality, they can be personalised, so you can meet the customer's needs really easily. They can ask you for exactly what you type of thing. And job satisfaction. Your workers aren't just producing one little bit of it, they're producing the entire product from start to finish, and they're probably likely to enjoy that. The disadvantages are basically your costs. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be expensive because you've got high quality products requiring probably higher quality raw materials. You're only producing small numbers of them, so that increases all your costs of production. And because somebody is creating something from start to finish, they're going to need to be a skilled worker, and you're going to have to pay more for those. The next type of production is batch production. Let's go over here for this. Batch production is what it says on the tin. It's producing things in batches. It's producing a group of products. So you produce one thing for a while, for example, white bread, and then you switch your production line and change it to brown bread. The easiest example of it is bakeries. Bakeries produce in batches, but you could also have, for example, books or magazine printing places. If you've got a book printers, it's the same production line, creating the exact same process, but you're going to be printing Harry Potter for 6 weeks, and then you're going to change it over and you're going to print something else for another 6 weeks. You're not going to be having an entire factory dedicated to producing that one book for eternity. The advantages are, again, you've got different customer needs that can be met by different batches, so you can increase your customer base, if that makes sense. You've got batches that can be made to particular orders. So if somebody comes to you and says, right, I need 5,000 loaves of white bread, you haven't got to store and freeze 5,000 loaves of white bread. You can just create them and ship them straight out. So it reduces your storage costs. And it may be possible to use specialist machines and automation, which we'll look at later. So we'll go reduce costs, machine/tech, that we'll look at in a bit. The disadvantages: time. You can't just switch over and it happens immediately. You've got to take the time out to change your production line slightly, to change the materials that you're putting in, potentially to change the staff. And time costs money. It may be necessary to keep stocks of raw materials. So if you know that you've got to make white bread today but brown bread tomorrow, you might need to keep the ingredients, which has an impact on cash flow. If you're having to hold stock, that's costing you money, and it's keeping money that then can't be immediately turned into new money. You're holding it. There's less choice, and tasks may be repetitive, which decreases job satisfaction. If you're just creating the same piece of the same thing over and over again, you're not going to be as satisfied as producing something from start to finish and seeing the end result. So, less choice. And I put negative job satisfaction. That's not what I meant. It is what I meant, but I could have said job dissatisfaction, which would have made more sense. But as long as you know what I mean. Then, third type, flow production. I've had a couple of emails asking me if flow production and mass production are two separate things. No, they are the same thing. You would probably call this mass production, but your exam board says flow production. Either are fine. They are exactly the same thing. There's no difference. We're talking about exactly the same thing. It's basically having an assembly line and making the same product over and over and over and over and over again. So I'm going to go continuous, one product, and if I put line, an easy example of this is biscuits. If you've got a big company like McVitie's, they will have a production line for digestives, and that production line will make purely digestives for eternity, and then one production line for hobnobs, and it will make hobnobs over and over and over and over again. Another example is cars, but not luxury cars. Luxury cars are more likely to be produced in batch or job production, depending on how luxury, because you need that kind of customer personalisation, and you need more skills and quality. But cars like the Fiesta that has just been produced over and over and over and over again, they've got a production line for Fiesta. The advantages: you can produce really massive quantities. You can't produce the same quantities in batch production or job production. It simply isn't possible. You've got to have a production line to create that sort of quantity. Low cost, because you're producing such a massive quantity, and because you're producing continuously, and because it's on a line, it keeps all of the costs really, really low. Also, because you're producing in such massive quantities, you're going to be buying in your stock in such massive quantities, which means that you're probably going to be likely to be in a position to bargain and get it at a lower cost. You've got low staffing costs, probably because you've got machinery to do that job for you. And actually, one advantage is technology, and I'll go on to that later. But basically, with technology, you've got the chance to put in some sort of personalisation. So, for example, changing the paint colour on your Fiesta. It's not going to be as advanced as if you were doing job or batch production, where if you were making Rolls Royce, you could customise every single minute detail. But because of technology in flow production, you can have some element of personalisation. The disadvantages are that it might be lower quality because you haven't got skilled workers checking it at every stage. It's just going on a production line continuously, so production might be compromised slightly. You've got high startup costs. Buying the machinery is going to cost you a lot. In the long term, it'll save you money, but at the start, it's going to have a massive outlay. Jobs can be repetitive and boring. Chances are if you're working on a production line, you're just doing something really simple like screwing on a wheel over and over and over again, or pouring in the flour over and over and over and over again. You're not doing anything particularly interesting. So you've got boring jobs, which equals dissatisfaction. And any minor issues with this technology, if something teeny tiny goes wrong, it's going to hold up your entire production line. So tech is a disadvantage as well as an advantage. A big bonus of tech is that in theory it can run for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But if something goes wrong, it's going to mess up the entire production line, which is going to cost you big. So we need to understand technology in production. There are 3 types of technology that you need to understand. The first is automation. Automation is the replacement of human labour with machinery. It's basically getting rid of a human job and having a machine do it instead. For example, in production, having machinery to put things together or make things rather than humans. You will still need workers in automation. It's not going to completely remove the need for human beings, because on the production line, you're going to need a few to make sure that things are working properly, to make sure that issues don't happen that cost you big. And you might need people to kind of service it or press a button or something like that. So it's not going to completely remove people, but it removes a lot of people from production. The next is computers. In automation, I said you might need somebody to press a button to get things started. Computers are helping to automate that even more. Particularly in service industries, computers are really, really important. For example, on your phone, now you can do banking on your phone. You don't have to actually go into a branch and speak to somebody. You can pay in a check on your phone. So that's completely changing the service industry. Robotics is the last, and they're the things that are preventing you needing people to push the button. They're going to push the button for you. The robots take out the entire human thought process behind it. It's an extension of automation. It's taking automation and removing people even more. The advantages of technology are that costs are reduced because you don't need human beings. You might have that initial high startup cost of outlaying for the technology, but in the long term, you're not going to be paying people wages or as many wages. Things can also be produced faster. You can train technology and program technology to do it way quicker and way better than human beings can ever do it. So that keeps your costs lower as well. Machines can be more accurate. You haven't got human error in there, so that reduces wastage, which keeps costs lower. Machinery is never going to be absent from work. You've not got to pay them for maternity leave or holiday or sick pay. And they can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In addition to that, machines can or will do the boring jobs that people can't or won't do. So they're really, really good for that sort of thing. You haven't got that kind of human judgment in there. The disadvantages are that you've got to make people redundant. If you're going automated, you're going to have to make people redundant, which morally is quite a hard thing for some people to do. But you've also got redundancy payouts. You can't just say to people, off you go, bye-bye, and they're done. You have to pay them off. New skilled workers might be needed to manage the technology. Like I said, in automation, you're probably not going to be able to immediately allow the technology to run on its own, and you're probably going to need technologically skilled people to do that running, and those people are probably going to need higher wages because they're more highly skilled. Machinery can break down, like I said, and if your machinery breaks down, it's going to halt the entire production line, which is going to cost you big. It's expensive initially, and customers sometimes do not like technology, particularly when we're talking about computers. There are still people who won't like to pay in their checks on their phone. There's still people who want to go and speak to a person, see a person, rather than actually being involved in technology. And if a company goes entirely technology based too soon, some customers will actually boycott it and say, actually, no, I'm going to go to the company who are still using people. And lastly, a really big one, which has become really important in the last few years, is security issues. If you're storing any sort of data on people, think online banking, you've got loads of information about people, there's massive security issues with that, and there's lots of regulations that you have to comply with. GDPR came in the last few years, and that's massive. And if you get that wrong, there's going to be huge cost implications. So, quite a simple one. There's a lot of videos on the Google Classroom to help you with this, to give you examples of what's going on, but hopefully that helps to make it make a little bit of sense.